Pardon the fact that I'm having some sort of facial outbreak as I actually regress in age. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Motley Show, where we try to take one of the bigger stories out of news and politics each week, step outside the echo chamber, and see if we can figure out what's really going on and why should we care. Now, while the idea of a mass shooting might just seem like a repeat of what I did last week, it is actually a different mass shooting. And as we've found out through numerous statistics, that there have actually been more than one mass shooting a day this whole year. So theoretically, I could do an episode of the Motley Show every single week about numerous mass shootings that had taken place. Of course, the most recent one that we're talking about is the one that took place in San Bernardino in the Inland Empire. And while facts about that are still coming out, we don't really know the true motivations yet. There have been many details that have been found out about the two people who took part in the massacre, and we've seen the incredibly deplorable activity of the media as they rushed into the apartment of those people and rummaged through everything looking for basically evidence or anything salacious that they could put on television. But that's not exactly what this particular episode is about. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today was the reaction from various politicians and the reaction from certain parts of the media about those reactions. Because one of the things we see every single time a tragedy like this takes place is people send out their thoughts and prayers. And while that is not in itself a bad thing, what the New York Daily News decided to point out was it is a bad thing if that's all you're doing. So let's take a look at the initial tweets that were sent out by each of the GOP candidates after the shooting took place. Ben Carson says, "My thoughts and prayers are with the shooting victims and their families in San Bernardino." Chris Christie says, "Praying for all those victimized by the shootings in San Bernardino, California today." Donald Trump, in his own special way, goes, "California's shooting looks very bad. Good luck to law enforcement and God bless. This is when our police are so appreciated." Jeb Bush said, "Praying for the victims, their families, and the San Bernardino first responders in the wake of this tragic shooting." John Kasich, "My thoughts and prayers go out to those impacted by the shooting in San Bernardino, especially the first responders." Lindsey Graham goes more concise, "Thoughts and prayers are with hashtag San Bernardino." Mike Huckabee, "Praying for those impacted by the shooting in California today." Rand Paul, "My thoughts and prayers are with the victims, families, and brave first responders during this unspeakable tragedy." Ted Cruz, "Our prayers are with the victims, their families, and the first responders in San Bernardino who willingly go into harm's way to save others." Now those were all the GOP candidates. Let's take a look at what the Democratic candidates decided to say. Bernie Sanders, "Mass shootings are becoming an almost everyday occurrence in this country. This sickening and senseless gun violence must stop." Hillary Clinton, "I refuse to accept this as normal. We must take action to stop gun violence now." And Martin O'Malley decides to go right after the head of the dragon. "Horrifying news out of San Bernardino. Enough is enough. It's time to stand up to the NRA and enact meaningful gun safety laws." So there's a distinct difference between the reaction of the parties. The Democratic Party takes instances like this, and yes, you might say that they immediately go after gun control, but it is part of their platform. It is part of what they believe will help things like this not happen. While the GOP side decides it's only prayer. That's pretty much it. You can pray that these things won't happen again. And because that was the universal response from the GOP, the New York Daily News decided to call that out with emboldened frustration, saying, God isn't fixing this. Because really, each of those tweets from the GOP say nothing. They say nothing about what they would do to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because they're too afraid of the NRA. And while some who are going after the evangelical and the religious crowd, they might say the reason why shootings like this are happening is because we've taken God out of the public space. We don't talk about God anymore, we don't pray in public, we don't have prayer in public schools, things like that. But let's just think about the fact that maybe, just maybe, the people who are praying after tragedies like this are actually praying that God, if there is one, works through the politicians to help enact legislation that would make sure these things don't happen again, or at least hinder them. Maybe that's what they're praying for. Maybe they're praying for action to be taken instead of just platitudes given out every single time. Now, Ted Cruz in particular really isn't going after the idea of any sort of gun control, because right after this happened, he's continuing this weekend to go hold a rally in Iowa at a gun range where he will unveil a Second Amendment coalition, somehow believing that a group like this coming together can protect the Second Amendment, which he believes is under constant attack. But not every politician is taking that tact when it comes to the NRA and gun legislation. While at a much smaller level, former Nevada Assembly Speaker and current Democratic candidate for Congress, John Oseguera, withdrew his membership from the NRA basically in protest of the fact that they lobby against any legislation, even the smallest legislation, that could try to stem the flow of guns into the hands of the wrong people. And then the NRA and their allies are responding just as they usually do, with the idea of arm people everywhere. That will stop this, because we'll certainly have less gun gunfights if everybody has guns. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who's a retired professor from West Point, gives speeches all the time to the NRA, and he's considered a professor of killology. And you want to know what his response to the San Bernardino massacre was? Our founding fathers knew there would be days like this, and they created the Second Amendment just for a time like this. Now, I'm not quite sure if he's saying that everyone being armed against mass shootings like this is what our forefathers thought of, because I can guarantee you that's not true. What he might be referring to is that cases like this and instances like these mass shootings are causing people to question the Second Amendment, and maybe he believes that the government is coming in to just take everyone's guns away, and that's what the Second Amendment was for. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. But this follow-up is ridiculous. The message is, if you have Muslims in the workplace, you have due cause to fear them. Offend their religion, offend them, and they and their family will come and kill you. Nothing like stoking the paranoia of everyone in the country against one particular ethnicity. It's statements like that that equate to statistics like 185,000 background checks being run on Black Friday, the highest in history for a single day. Now, some people might point to the fact that California does have fairly strict gun laws compared to many other states in the country, but when you say, well, look, it happened in California, so gun laws must not do anything, you have to remember that the strongest gun laws in the country by state are only as strong as the weakest state in the country, because guns flow freely from state to state. A lot of people point at Chicago and they say, look at the gun violence there, and they have a Democratic mayor, and they have one of the highest murder rates in the country. But yet, statistics show that a slight majority of the guns found at murder scenes and crime scenes in Chicago are actually guns that were bought out of state and traveled over the line. That's why there needs to be federal regulations and not statewide regulations, because they just don't work. There's no way to stop somebody from traveling over a state line with the gun, unless you're going to put border protection on every single road between every single state and search every single car and every single person. And going back to the idea of whether or not prayer can fix this, Senator Chris Murphy had basically hit his boiling point when he responded with Twitter saying this: "Your thoughts should be about steps to take to stop this carnage. Your prayers should be for forgiveness if you do nothing. Again." And his "again" comment doesn't just mean because it's another mass shooting. This is Chris Murphy, who's a senator from Connecticut, where Sandy Hook took place. And so many people said back then that was going to be the turning point for gun control legislation, because that was the scene of little kids being shot down by an automatic weapon. And if that couldn't shake the country to the core and get something done, nothing could. So Chris Murphy knows all too well what it's like to move ahead doing nothing after something so seemingly tragic that it should have elicited some sort of response. But he's not alone. Not only the New York Daily News, but even the New York Times, which I'm taping this on Friday night. Tomorrow morning, their Saturday edition, they will be running a front page editorial about gun violence and the lack of movement of gun legislation, the fact that we are doing nothing about it in this country. That front page editorial hasn't happened since 1920. That's how big of a deal it is. That's how frustrated certain people are getting with the idea of inaction. Now, there are many people calling for many different things when you say, what actions would you take? But still, universal background checks is one of the number one things, and most of the public actually does support that. It's just the legislators who are scared of the NRA and other gun rights groups are too frightened to actually take that vote. Will San Bernardino change them? Will the Colorado Planned Parenthood clinic change them? Who knows? But there's other stuff out there that could help too. There's smart gun technology that could actually be widely accepted by various states. And right now, some states are banning that. They're not even allowing gun stores to sell smart guns because the NRA doesn't want that kind of technology out there, because they think it'll hinder the fact that people could give guns freely to other people or sell them to private citizens, which should tell you what the NRA's motivation is. It's not to protect gun rights, it's to sell guns. And the other thing that people are complaining about right now is that medical researchers are actually banned. There's a 20-year-old ban against researching gun violence. So you might see a strong push to lift that ban, to try to get more data about actually how this affects everyone, especially those who find themselves in the hospital. So the question for this week is, what do you think of the response of just saying pray on it? And if you think that's not enough and you think there should be action taken, what action do you think should be taken? Let me know in the comments down below. So thanks again for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, or to the daily vlogs that I've been doing, you can do either of those things right here. You can also like, favorite, or share this episode to anyone else you think might want to jump in the discussion. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's one of the kids.
giraffe.
No, what is that? Look at his face. What is that?
Animal.
It is an animal. It's a tiger.
Hi, tiger.
That's a tiger?
Or a lion.
It's a lion.
Shush. It's a lion, Logan. Don't pull on it, please. Watch your elbow.
There used to be over 2,000 clinics that performed this procedure, and by 2013 it was down to 582. And this was due to not only the violence, but also state administrations creating sham laws that had no other purpose than to shut these down. But it's really not their choice, it's not their religion, it's the religion of the parents. Me being an atheist, I'm not going to push that on either of the boys. I'm not going to push any religion on them. And when they grow up, if they choose to be something else, that is completely within their realm of decision making.